The Conservatives are wrapping their campaign around this man's leadership credentials. But what strong beliefs, if any, run behind the furrowed brow? What, if anything, connects the cuddly, eco-friendly conservatism of the past?
You should judge people by what they're going to do and what they can contribute.
With what his opponents see as the colder conservatism of the last 5 years.
We found 2 Albanians.
I am a modern, compassionate conservative. That's what I am, that's what I'll always be. I would argue the change that took place is when I became leader of the party in 2005-06. It was in a different economic environment. I didn't change. The circumstances I faced changed.
The polling suggests voters think he walks and talks the part.
We'll get powered by the reactor.
Yes.
One who's watched him around the cabinet table thinks David Cameron consciously models himself on a line of charismatic political leaders who over the decades have created a kind of template for modern political leadership.
Clinton was desperately anxious to be like Kennedy. Blair modelled himself on Clinton quite closely.
And David Cameron?
I've heard David refer to Tony Blair as the master. But that, let's face it, is in tune with modern politics. When they tread the boards, that is what they're now expected to look and sound like. And David was just a natural. He didn't have to try too hard to fall into that succession. I'm not sure he's the best of them.
Ken has a way with words. I'm not sure I'd buy any of that, but he was a very valuable member of this actually coalition team and helped to keep things together.
But he says he's heard you refer to Tony Blair as the master.
No, that's not what... Look, I wanted to get rid of Tony Blair.
Tories say their leader, unlike the current Labour leader, is good at taking decisions. But is overconfidence sometimes a problem?
He quite impulsively takes decisions. He can take decisions. I think modern...
Back of an envelope?
Well, very quickly. And you know, everybody has to have somebody who can rush in and get them to hold on a minute. The instant decision that you take after 5 or 10 minutes of listening to someone explain the problem may not be the one you still hold if you listen to somebody else actually explaining what the snags are.
Sometimes I want to get stuck in and get something fixed, and I can, you know, I think I can sometimes want to do something too quickly. I'd accept sometimes.
So what does David Cameron believe in, consistently? Well, not coalition. Though once upon a time he sold it as a brave new world.
We are announcing a new politics. A new politics where the national interest is more important than the party interest.
You told us it would be a new politics, a different politics, a better politics.
I think it was.
Past tense. But
well,
you want the old politics now.
No,
You want to run it on your own.
We had a coalition. I think it was right for the time. We've done the major repairs to the British economy, and it helped having 2 parties doing it together. I feel now, and I think the British people agree with this, that actually the time for a strong and decisive and frankly more accountable government is now.
So what about David Cameron's constant mantra that the country must live within its means? In this campaign, he's been spraying around money. Billions on the NHS, billions more on tax cuts.
That is wholly realistic and funded,
But
because
not
it's all...
funded.
Yes,
It's not funded. No economist would describe that as funded. You're just hoping for growth that will somehow
No, it's not
support
about.
it.
It's not about. We have forecasts for growth set independently now because we have an independent Office of Budget
If Ed
Responsibility.
Miliband made those promises, you would call them unfunded.
Well, no, because Ed Miliband doesn't have what we have, which is setting out the spending figures for 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018.
On Europe, how did he end up here? The man who told his party to stop banging on about Europe, facing a second term that would be dominated by a renegotiation and an in-out referendum.
Renegotiation and referendum policy has been primarily driven from first to last by party management.
Is that great statesmanship?
Well, arguably, you can't do anything if you can't keep your party together. And
It's not how he sells it, is it?
No, of course not.
On Europe, you were against a referendum, then you were for a referendum with a renegotiation, and these days you can be found saying actually you're not even sure which side you'll be on in the referendum. And if I tracked your movement with political GPS, I'd find at every one of those moves you were moving because of your own backbenchers and the threat from UKIP.
No, I don't accept that. Well, what we're going to do is confront one of the great political issues of our time, which is, can we get a better relationship with Europe which the British people are comfortable with? And I profoundly believe that's the right thing to do.
One Number 10 aide recalls that when he came to join David Cameron's team at Number 10, another advisor told him, "Don't go looking for Dave's irreducible core. You won't find it." Allies say he is a man of profoundly held principles. It's just he doesn't wave them around like other politicians. He's a very particular type.
In David's case, he's a very English gentleman. And that means that because his principles, his beliefs are understated, because he doesn't talk about them in the way that most English people, for example, don't talk about their deep beliefs, whether religious or political or otherwise, that shouldn't lead you to believe that he doesn't have them.
I always feel if you look at David Cameron's face, his expression, his mannerisms, the way he does his business, you could put a 18th century bishop's wig on him. You could put one of those three-cornered admiral's hats from the 18th century on him. You could imagine him going out to govern New South Wales. He's a characteristic Englishman of a certain kind.
I don't think that's really fair.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Head, heart and soul, we want you to stay.
David Cameron told Scots voters it would break his heart if Scotland left the United Kingdom. But his focus after the referendum quickly switched to voters in his English homeland.
Now the millions of voices of England must also be heard.
Despite all the passion David Cameron showed in the Scottish referendum campaign, he's been accused since of being careless of the Union, playing the English card, as in his speech today. And when he spoke here just after the referendum, suddenly linking pledged powers to Scotland to a new way of England voting on its laws. He pulled back from that pretty quickly, but it all played into a narrative that Scotland had been duped.
Let's deal with this thing about reneging on the deal. That is completely untrue.
But it's how it's perceived.
Well, but it's wrong. I mean, you know, what matters is the reality.
You should have been more careful about what you said that
I
morning.
think I've been very careful, which is
Alistair
I've
Darling
said
told you
the
not to say it.
the promises we've made about more powers for the Scottish Parliament and tax-raising powers and everything that's in the vow, that will be delivered.
If David Cameron does get to stay put here after the general election, send away the removal vans, perhaps find himself at the head of a minority Conservative government, could he start another political journey? What would life be like if he was at the mercy of the right wing of his own party, the awkward squad, no longer protected by the buffer of Lib Dem MPs?
He'd have to run a more collaborative style of government. He'd have to take the centre-right much more seriously in his cabinet. He'd have to consult with them much more.
The David Cameron we knew when he first took over in 2005, cuddling huskies, would be an even more remote memory.
Yes.
We've built a greener economy, we've cut carbon emissions, we've led the world in many of these causes, we've kept our promises to the poorest in the world with what we've done in terms of the aid budget. So I think you can trace a very clear line between someone who ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party as a modern, compassionate Conservative and someone who governs as one in a coalition and would govern as one if elected as a majority Conservative government.
He was chosen by his party for his election-winning potential. He failed to win outright last time. If he's out of number 10, it will feel very personal. Death of a political salesman. If he holds on to the job, his judgment calls, his style and personality will have been central to a very sweet victory in strange political times.